Opening hook / voiceover tone, calm, deep southern drawl. They say the dead don't whisper to the living, but in the summer of 1854, deep in the sweltering red clay of Georgia, there was a girl who swore she could hear them sing. They called her the Mourning Dove. A blind slave child no older than 15, whose voice, they said, could calm storms, and raise the dead. Narration begins, slow, atmospheric, with historical detail. The story of Etta Mae began on the Hartwell Plantation, 30 miles north of Milledgeville, the old capital of Georgia. The land there was unforgiving. So were the men who owned it. Hartwell's fields ran red with mud and blood, rows of cotton twisting out of the soil like pale veins, feeding the greed of a man named Colonel Judson Reddick. He was known across the county as a God-fearing man. But God, on that land, was just another overseer. Etta was born in the slave quarters, a sickly child, her eyes milky white from birth. The midwife called it the devil's veil, a curse that marked her as unholy. By the age of 9, she had already been whipped twice for speaking to shadows. They said she muttered names that no one knew, names of people long buried beneath the soil. Transition, quiet, eerie tone. And then, one August morning, after a storm that broke fences and split trees, Etta began to hum. It wasn't a song any of them had heard before, low, slow, almost like a church hymn carried backward through time. The field hand said the air grew still when she sang, the mules stopped, the birds went quiet. And for the first time in years, the overseer, a cruel man named Boone, dropped his whip. He asked her, trembling, "Who taught you that song?" She smiled, with those clouded eyes, and whispered, "They did." Documentary tone, analytical narration, historical texture. Plantation records from 1854 list Etta Mae as non-functional labor, a term used for slaves who could not work the fields, but several surviving testimonies from the Hartwell estate mention a blind girl who sang to ghosts. Local folklore from the region still remembers her. A fragment of a children's rhyme collected in 1908 says, "Don't go out when the dove does cry, the girl in white is passing by, she hums the names of men long dead, and calls them back from where they bled." Voiceover, slow and dark. That same August, something began to happen. Men who'd worked the fields their whole lives started dreaming of people they'd buried. One said he saw his brother standing by the well, soaking wet, eyes wide open. Another claimed he heard knocking from under the barn. By September, 3 overseers were dead. One hanged himself in the loft. One drowned in the irrigation ditch, and the third disappeared altogether. The slaves whispered that Etta Mae had called them back, that she'd sung their souls into madness. Transition, historical realism with poetic narration. There's an account from Sheriff Amos Granger, who visited the plantation that fall. He wrote in his journal, "I have seen many strange things in my service, but never the like of what I found at Hartwell. The child sat in the church alone, humming over bones, and every window pane trembled, though there was no wind. The colonel ordered her chained inside the smokehouse, claiming she was in league with devils. They locked her in for 6 days, no food, no water, but the singing didn't stop. People said they heard it from the fields at night, echoing under the dirt. Some said the melody came from below, from the graves of those she'd named." Voiceover, suspense tone building to segment 2. On the 7th day, when they opened the door to drag her body out, Etta Mae was gone. The chains were still there. So was the stain of her blood. But the girl vanished, and for weeks after that, the field stayed bare. No cotton grew. No birds returned. Only that song, carried on the wind like a warning. They say if you go there even now, on the anniversary of that storm, you can hear her voice humming through the trees, and sometimes, the earth hums back. When Etta Mae vanished, the plantation fell silent, the cotton rotted on its stems, and the workers refused to step into the fields after sunset. Colonel Reddick called it Negro superstition. But every night, he heard that same distant humming slip through the walls of his big white house. The men said it rose from the well. Documentary narration, historical texture. The Hartwell estate's well stood behind the smokehouse, its timbers old and bowed from decades of Georgia heat. By autumn of 1854, the colonel had sent 3 men to inspect it. Only one came back, a field hand named Jonas. According to a written testimony recorded in 1891 by a local pastor, Jonas told this story on his deathbed. "We lowered the bucket, but it didn't hit water. It hit something soft first, like a cloth, then bone, and when we pulled it up, there was hair in it, white as flour." The pastor claimed Jonas wept when he spoke those words. Voiceover, building tension, the colonel ordered the well sealed the same day that he told the men it was to keep the water pure, but the next morning, the boards had been ripped apart from the inside, the chains from the smokehouse door were missing. 2. Analytical tone, narrator commentary, modern records can't verify the incident. But letters preserved in the Reddick family collection mention unrest among the colored folk and the matter of the singing well. It seems the story was known beyond the plantation. By late October, neighboring farms reported their livestock refusing to drink from shared streams. A local deacon blamed the girl's curse. And for the first time, white families in the county began nailing iron crosses to their doors, a custom borrowed from the slaves themselves. Voiceover, ominous slow pace. On October 28, the colonel summoned a new overseer from Savannah, a man named Silas Pruitt, known for discipline. Pruitt was a giant of a man, with hands like shovels and a scar that ran from ear to chin. He laughed at the tales of the singing well, said he'd make the spirits work the fields if they had arms. That night, he slept in the quarters loft. By morning, he was gone. The only thing they found was his whip, coiled at the well's edge, its handle still warm to the touch. Documentary aside, archival narration, county records list Silas Pruitt as missing, presumed departed north. But the slave registry for Hartwell notes a sharp decline in productivity after his disappearance. The ledger's margin bears a single phrase written in the colonel's hand: Dove's song returned. Voiceover, haunting tone, the songs grew louder after that. One worked past sunset, children covered their ears with rags at night, the melody shifted, no longer a hymn, but a dirge. Some said they heard two voices now, intertwined. One was Etta May's, the other, deep, broken, and angry, belonged to a man. Transition, journal entry recounting, a letter dated November 3, 1854. From Colonel Reddick to his brother in Augusta reads, the air is foul with rot, the hands swear they see the girl at the tree line each dusk that I burned the chains myself, but they reeked of the grave. Should I not write again, let this serve as my confession, I hear them too. That was the last letter he ever sent. Voiceover, closing build to next segment. 2 weeks later, a search party arrived from Milledgeville. They found the plantation abandoned, tools half buried in the earth, doors open, food still on the tables. When they reached the well, they found it unsealed again, and beside it, something carved into the mud with a nail. She sings for them now. The search party covered the well with stone and left it to collapse, but locals say it still breathes when it rains, and every year on October 28th, the night Silas Pruitt disappeared, a white dove lands on the stones and coos until sunrise. By winter's edge of 1854, the name Hartwell had become a curse. Families whispered it over dinner the way one whispers disease. Keep away from the Reddick land, they'd say, nothing grows where the mourning dove sings. The plantation itself lay empty, its cabins sagging, its fences eaten by kudzu and rot, yet on certain nights, travelers on the road to Milledgeville swore they saw lamplight moving between the fields, slow and patient, as if someone were still harvesting in the dark. Documentary tone, archival framing, the first written account of the Hartwell collapse comes from the diary of Reverend Silas Merrow, dated December 12, 1854. He'd been sent by the county to reclaim church property after Colonel Reddick's disappearance. His entry reads, the air hung heavy and warm though frost lay northward. I felt the ground hum as though 100 bees swarmed beneath it, and from the direction of the well came a tune too sorrowful for this earth. Merrow's horse refused to step past the main gate. He went on foot. Voiceover, deep, measured narration, he found the big house standing crooked against the horizon, the windows black, the doors yawning open like mouths. Inside, every portrait had been turned to the wall, and the parlor floorboards buckled as though something beneath had pushed upward, then stopped. When he reached the dining hall, he saw the colonel's chair overturned, and the table laid for 3.1 plate was still warm. The fire still burned, though the hearth was choked with ash that whispered when it moved. Transition, reflective tone, Merrow wrote that he heard humming from beneath the floor, not a single voice this time, but a chorus, men, women, children, low, unbroken, steady. He knelt and pressed his ear to the boards. He swore he could make out the words, dig no more. Let them sleep. He fled the house before dusk. Analytical commentary, documentary style, historians debate what happened next. Some claim an earthquake struck central Georgia on December 15, 1854, though no geological record confirms it. Others say the collapse was man-made, that slave tunnels beneath the fields finally gave way after years of neglect, but local accounts insist otherwise. Voiceover. Storytelling flow. 3 survivors were found along the riverbank days later, 2 children and an elderly woman known as Aunt Liddy. Their statements were taken by Deputy Clem Bourne. Only fragments of the transcript remain. Bourne: what did you see when the ground opened? Liddy: light, sir. Like the moon was buried down there. And I heard singing. Bourne: who was singing? Liddy: the girl, and them she woke. She refused to say more. That night, she hung herself from a magnolia tree beside the road. Voiceover. Slower, colder tone. The county sent laborers to fill the sinkholes. They dumped gravel and timber until the earth stopped swallowing, but one pit, the largest, the one that gaped where the well had been, kept sinking. Every time they filled it, the soil would settle and breathe out a long, hollow moan, as if the ground itself exhaled. They called it the Morning Mouth. By January 1855, the entire tract was condemned. Nothing but bones and stones remained. Documentary aside, connecting folklore, for decades afterward, travelers on the Milledgeville Road spoke of hearing hymns drifting through the fog. In 1897, a railroad survey crew unearthed fragments of pottery and what they described as woven cloth fused to limestone. A geologist noted that the rock carried a faint metallic hum when struck with a hammer, a resonance akin to the tone of a church bell heard underwater. Voiceover. Reflective close. Locals came to believe the Hartwell plantation never truly died, that it had simply sunk beneath its own guilt. They said Etta Mae's voice was the only thing that kept it still, a lullaby binding the restless dead. But when the new century came and the land was sold for rail expansion, that song ceased. The engineers cleared the last of the trees, laid down steel and stone, and with the first train whistle that cut through the valley, the hum returned, deep, mournful, endless. They say it hasn't stopped since. In the spring of 1902, nearly 50 years after the Hartwell collapse, the Atlantic Southeastern Railway announced its new line would cut directly through the abandoned Reddick property. Progress had no patience for ghosts. Steel, coal, and ambition had replaced scripture in Georgia's heart. The men who arrived to clear the land didn't know its story. They were immigrants mostly, Irish, Polish, and freedmen seeking wages. The old families of Burke County didn't correct them, they just watched from a distance and muttered that the ground had a memory and it never forgave. Documentary tone, historical context. Construction began April 9. The first week went without incident. Trees were felled, the soil leveled, and survey stakes rose where the big house once stood. Then the tools began to go missing. Hammers left beside tents vanished overnight. Carts of gravel rolled downhill with no wind, and horses refused to cross the lowest stretch of land, the one the foreman had marked Section 7. Section 7 lay over what had been the old well, the pit once called the Morning Mouth. Voiceover. Hushed tone, suspense building. On the 10th day, a man named Leon Hardy was assigned to dig the foundation trench along Section 7. He was 31, a veteran of the Spanish-American War, man who didn't believe in spirits, only in steel and soil. By noon, the others noticed he'd stopped singing. By dusk, they noticed he hadn't come back. His shovel was found beside the trench, the metal still warm, the ground around it soft, breathing as though something beneath had just swallowed. Analytical commentary, slow narration. The company records describe it as a subsurface collapse. But the report filed by Foreman Willard Klein adds a single line the company later struck through in red: we heard the singing again. Low and far, like a woman's voice carried through the dirt. That night, none of the workers slept. They spoke in whispers of faces seen through fog and of the ground shifting under their feet as if it had a pulse. Voiceover. Eerie storytelling tone. By morning, 3 men had quit the job. They left their pay unclaimed. Klein replaced them with convicts from Savannah Prison Farm, men the state leased for labor, cheap and expendable. The new crew worked fast, but none would touch Section 7 without orders. They said the soil there smelled wrong, sweet like rotted flowers and wet iron. Transition, cold, calm delivery. On May 2nd, the foreman brought in a preacher. A local Baptist named Reverend C.J. Cole, who believed fear was just sin wearing another face. That he stood on the lip of the pit, Bible open, and began to pray. Witnesses later said the wind changed as he spoke, the air grew heavy, and a sound rose from the trench below. Not wind, not water, but breathing. Cole froze. Then he said one word: mercy. And before anyone could move, the ground beneath him gave way. Documentary aside, eyewitness account, a written deposition by engineer Harold Dyer survives in the county archives. The Reverend went down quick, like a man stepping through glass that we threw rope, but there was nothing to catch, only the sound, faint as a hymn through a church door, singing. Soft, slow, in a woman's tone. No body was ever recovered. The well had reclaimed another name, voiceover, reflective, haunted tone. For weeks, construction stalled, company investors grew impatient, demanding progress, threatening to cut pay if the crews didn't continue. So they filled Section 7 with concrete, tons of it, until the earth finally held still. They laid the tracks, nailed the iron, and by late June, the line was complete. The inaugural train crossed the valley at dusk, its whistle splitting the air like a blade. Tone shift. Eerie observation, witnesses in nearby towns reported hearing it differently, not a whistle, but a scream that echoed across the fields and carried for miles. Dogs howled, cows refused to move, the sound lasted only seconds, then silence, so deep it made your ears ache. That night, the train's engineer, Samuel Poole, failed to return. His cabin was empty, his lantern still lit, his gloves folded neatly on the control lever. Analytical narration, calm documentary voice. The official record lists occupational exhaustion as the cause of Poole's disappearance, but his fireman, John Callahan, swore under oath that Poole vanished mid-route, one moment shouting orders, the next gone, the whistle blowing on its own. The company sealed the logs and forbade discussion, but the local paper in Waynesboro printed a short notice: engineer missing on new line, strange sounds reported near Old Hartwell grounds. The public never read the follow-up. By July, the railway had rerouted its service entirely, avoiding Section 7 altogether. Voiceover, chilling close, cinematic fade. Now, more than a century later, train conductors still swear the air hums when they pass the old crossing. They say the rails vibrate softly, like strings of a buried instrument, and sometimes, if you listen from the tree line, you can still hear the hymn, low, patient, endless, not mourning anymore, but warning. By the fall of 1903, the Reddick property had become little more than a scar on the landscape. The railway had cut through the old fields like a wound, but nothing had grown since. No grass, no birds, just cracked clay and the faint smell of smoke that lingered after rain. Yet one structure still stood, a small chapel of pine and plaster, half collapsed but stubborn against time. They called it St. Mercy's. Though no saint had ever blessed it, it had been built by the slaves, rumor said, as a place where no master's name could be spoken. Documentary tone, archival narration. A traveling surveyor named Ephraim Lee arrived that October. He'd been hired by the state to document abandoned churches for possible demolition. The work was simple: measure, photograph, report, move on. But when he reached the Reddick site, he found the chapel door chained shut. From the inside, the chain was rusted, fused to the hinge. No footprints in the dust, no sign of entry for decades. Still, he swore he heard something within. A low, rhythmic sound, not wind, not wood, something like breathing. Voiceover, eerie calm, slow pacing. Lee stayed outside until sunset, waiting for the sound to stop. It never did. So he broke the chain. The moment the door swung open, the air inside hit him like heat from a furnace, wet, heavy, metallic. He lit his lantern and stepped forward. The chapel interior was blackened, the pews warped with age. At the far end stood the altar, and behind it, something carved into the wall, not a cross, but a figure. It wasn't human. Long-limbed, head tilted back, eyes hollowed clean through, and beneath the carving, etched in crude letters, were the words, "The earth remembers what men forget." Historical narration, calm, analytical voice. Lee documented the find carefully. His field journal, now preserved in the Georgia Historical Archive, records the discovery in brief, then grows erratic. The handwriting wavers, the grammar collapses. The final entry reads, "There's music under the floor, not heard, but felt. It beats like something trapped wants to breathe again." Lee never filed his report. His horse was found tied to a tree near the railway, his journal beneath the saddle. His body never recovered. Voiceover, dark, reflective tone. Locals claimed he'd wandered too close to Section 7, that the ground had taken him as it had taken the preacher and the worker before him, but others whispered something worse, that he hadn't been taken at all, that he'd joined what waited there. Transition. Deepening mystery. 2 months later, in December, a group of parishioners from Waynesboro came to dismantle the chapel. They planned to salvage the wood for a new church. Among them was an old woman named Clara May Dunlop, known for her quiet faith and sharp memory. She said her grandmother had been born a slave on that very land, and that St. Mercy's was no chapel, it was a warning post. The cross had been added later, she said, to keep people from looking too close, but Clara May looked anyway. Voiceover. Suspenseful build. As they began removing the altar, they found the boards beneath it loose. When they pried them open, they uncovered a hidden compartment, a shallow pit, lined with bones, small bones, children. 9 of them. Each skull had been split clean down the center, each one painted with white clay, and in the middle, a charm made of teeth and twine. Clara May fainted. When she awoke, she said she saw a figure at the doorway, tall, pale, and watching, but when the others turned, there was nothing there. Only dust and the faint hum of something alive beneath the soil. Documentary-style interjection, narration tone shift. The county sheriff sealed the site the same day. His report listed it as a ritual burial of uncertain origin. The bones were taken to Augusta for study, then quietly lost in a warehouse fire that winter. No official cause was ever released. The chapel, meanwhile, was burned down to its foundation. Locals claimed the fire burned cold, blue flames that made no smoke. When dawn came, nothing was left but ash and the imprint of the cross in the dirt. Voiceover. Quiet dread. Closing of the segment. Afterward, the land went quiet again. The railway stopped running within the year. Every worker who'd laid track through Section 7 either left Georgia or was buried by it. Some said the ground had taken back its name, that it would never let another man own it, and every time the wind passed through that valley, people swore it carried a whisper, not a curse, not a threat, but a plea. Remember me. By Christmas Eve of 1904, the new rail line through Burke County had been silent for nearly a year, but commerce forgets quickly. The Southern Atlantic Railway Company decided that one final test run would prove the route safe, a symbolic journey to reassure investors. The locomotive chosen was engine number 77, a coal-burning iron horse built in Pennsylvania, its brass polished, its whistle tuned to perfection. The engineer, Harold Marin, a veteran of 20 years on the rails, that he laughed when locals warned him about Section 7, that he said a line of steel obeyed no ghost. Documentary narration, steady. At 5:46 p.m., number 77 departed the Augusta depot with 6 crewmen and 12 passengers, rail officials, their wives, and 2 children. The manifest lists 20 souls in total. The weather was clear, the temperature hovered just above freezing. Newspapers later noted the moon was full that night, bright enough to paint the fields in silver. The train made good time until mile marker 58, where the tracks curved toward the old Reddick property. There, the telegraph operator at Millen Station heard the last message ever sent from engine 77 entering Hartwell Cut. All clear. Marin signing off. At 6:12 p.m., the line went dead. Voiceover. Slow, chilling. Witnesses in nearby Waynesboro reported hearing a sound just after 6:15, not thunder, not metal, but a drawn-out wail that started high and bled into silence. One farmer described it as a woman singing through a horn. Another said it made his livestock collapse. When rescue crews arrived at dawn, the rails ended abruptly at Section 7. Beyond that point lay a trench 50 feet deep, fresh, as if carved overnight. No sign of the train. No smoke, no splinters, nothing but the scent of burnt oil and lilac. Analytical narration, measured tone. The official investigation lasted 3 weeks. Engineers from Savannah examined the terrain and concluded that the train must have derailed into a sinkhole caused by subsidence. Yet there was no debris, no crater, no soil displacement large enough to swallow 12 tons of steel. Local legend offered another theory, that the ground itself had opened a mouth of memory, reclaiming what men refused to respect. Voiceover. Quiet dread. For years after, farmers plowing the lower fields said their blades struck metal, but when they dug, there was nothing there. Some nights, the ground would tremble faintly, not from earthquakes, but from something that pulsed deep beneath. And on Christmas Eves that followed, those who lived within 5 miles of Section 7 swore they heard it, a whistle. 3 short blasts, one long, the universal signal for distress. Transition. Archival detail. In 1907, a government surveyor named Marvin Holt attempted to chart the lost segment of track that he used new magnetic instruments recently imported from Boston. According to his report, the compass needles spun without rest near the old Reddick fields, and the air temperature dropped 10 degrees in a span of 4 yards. Holt withdrew his team and filed the site as geologically unstable. 2 months later, his assistant, Calvin Poe, was found drowned in a cattle pond 5 miles away. His lungs were filled with soot. Voiceover, grim analysis. Every decade since, someone has tried to dig there. Every time, the machinery breaks, the soil collapses, and the project dies quietly in paperwork. Rail historians call the incident the Hartwell disappearance. Unofficially, locals still call it the train that sank. Old-timers claim that if you place your ear to the ground in a still night near the tree lean, you'll hear the distant rhythm of pistons, the hiss of steam, and, faintly, voices reciting prayers that no church ever taught. Documentary aside, primary source voice. In 1922, a letter surfaced in the archives of St. Luke's Hospital, Augusta. It was written by Eleanor Marin, widow of the engineer. She claimed she received a parcel postmarked from Waynesboro, containing her husband's pocket watch. Inside the casing, beneath the cracked glass, the second hand still ticked. Backwards, the postmark bore no return address, only a single word stamped in red: remember. Voiceover, building to climax. By 1930, the valley had been fenced off. No one lived within a mile, birds avoided the place, even the insects fell silent. But on the 50th anniversary of the disaster, a group of rail enthusiasts from Atlanta came to lay a wreath at the presumed site. They camped overnight, only 5 returned. The survivors spoke of lights moving beneath the ground like lanterns passing through fog. They heard chains dragging, men calling orders, and somewhere below them, the whistle. 3 short, 1 long, again and again, until dawn. Closing voiceover, somber fade out. To this day, no trace of Engine 77 has been found. No records of salvage, no insurance claims, no graves, only that field, unfarmed and uneven, where the soil still breathes when the moon is full. Some say it's just gas pockets and old iron reacting to moisture, others say it's the train trying to finish its journey. Whatever the truth, the locals still refuse to walk that way after dark. They say if you listen long enough, you'll hear the same voice the engineer heard on his last night: mercy. And then, only silence. By January of 1905, the name Marin had become a quiet echo in Augusta. The newspapers stopped printing stories about the missing train, the company scrubbed its records clean, and the townsfolk agreed it was best not to mention the Christmas Eve disaster at all. But Eleanor Marin didn't forget. She couldn't. Every night, she'd wake at 6:12, the exact minute her husband's last telegraph was sent. The clock by her bedside never struck that hour, yet somehow she knew it, like her blood remembered what her mind refused to. Documentary narration, slow, factual tone. Eleanor lived alone on Broad Street, in a narrow house with ivy creeping through its shutters. Her husband's watch sat on the mantel, the one returned to her by post without explanation. It ticked softly, backwards, its hands circling counter to the world. She wound it once, then never again, yet it never stopped. Neighbors said she'd sit by it for hours, watching the gears turn, whispering to it as if listening for something between the clicks. Voiceover, suspense rising gently. On the evening of February 14, a young reverend named Thomas Elridge visited her home. He'd been assigned to comfort the widows of the disaster. In his journal, later recovered from the church archives, he described her house as too quiet, like sound itself had been banished. He found Eleanor in the sitting room, staring at the mantelpiece. The clock in the hallway read 6:30, but the pocket watch on the mantel read 6:12, its hands moving in reverse. It keeps the wrong time, he said gently. Eleanor turned to him, eyes pale, hollow. No, she whispered. It keeps his time. Analytical narration, cold tone. The Reverend noted strange sensations during his visit: a static hum in the air, a faint vibration underfoot, and a smell like iron shavings and lilac. When he reached to touch the watch, the ticking stopped, only to resume the moment he withdrew his hand. He left the house shaken, recording that he felt as if time folded inward, and that his own heartbeat had stumbled out of rhythm. He died 2 weeks later, found slumped at his desk. The coroner listed the cause as heart arrhythmia. His clock, found beside him, had frozen at 6:12. Voiceover, low, tense, slow pacing. After that, Eleanor became something of a ghost herself. The neighbors rarely saw her leave. Milk deliveries went untouched, letters piled by the door, but those who walked past at night claimed they saw a glow inside the house, a pale blue light flickering from room to room, as if the watch's ticking had become a heartbeat, and the house itself had learned to breathe. Documentary tone, archival realism. A local news clipping from April 1905 reported complaints of unexplained disturbances emanating from the Marin residence. glass breaking, strange music, and a voice reciting train timetables in a woman's tone. When police finally entered, they found Eleanor's house in perfect order. No damage. No music, only the watch on the mantel, its face fogged with condensation, and a faint ringing in the air that none could locate. The officer's report closes with one line: "We thought we heard a whistle, but no. Train runs through Augusta." Voiceover, unsettling calm. By summer, the house was empty. Eleanor was gone. No forwarding address, no farewell, only her front door left open, the curtains fluttering inward, and on the mantel, a single note written in looping script: "He called for me. I'm going to meet him. If the clock stops, I'll know he's home." The pocket watch lay beside it, still ticking. Analytical narration, historical reflection tone. In the months that followed, the property changed hands 3 times, every owner reported strange malfunctions, pendulums reversing direction, mirrors fogging at random, and, most curious of all, every timepiece in the house stopping simultaneously at 6 to 12. In 1911, the structure burned down in a sudden blaze. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but the flames burned without smoke, the same blue hue described decades earlier at the chapel. When the ashes cooled, they found the only object untouched by fire, a brass pocket watch, its hands frozen mid-tick, still pointing backward. Voiceover, closing reflection, slow and cinematic. Today, that watch sits in a locked case at the Augusta Historical Museum. No one has managed to open it since 1953. Yet security guards say it clicks softly some nights, always near closing time, always backward. Visitors who linger claim to feel dizzy, their phones lose time, there. Watches stall, and sometimes, for just a second, the world itself seems to breathe in reverse, and somewhere in that silence a faint echo of a train whistle drifts through the walls, followed by a single word, barely audible but unmistakable: mercy. By 1912, the Marin fire had already become another local ghost story, a curiosity whispered in taverns and written off by rational men as hysteria, but somewhere along the line, the pocket watch from the ashes found its way south, to Savannah, Georgia. No one knows who first carried it there, but in the winter of that year, a small parcel arrived at Wexler's Horology, a narrow workshop tucked behind Whitaker Street. The tag was unsigned. Inside, a brass watch, half melted, its face darkened by smoke, and a note written in perfect penmanship: "It keeps its own time. Make it right." Documentary narration, historical tone. The owner of the shop, Elias Wexler, was a man obsessed with precision. Born to German immigrants, he had apprenticed under clockmakers in Philadelphia before settling in Savannah, where his meticulous restorations earned him a reputation as the man who could fix time itself. He took the challenge as a point of pride. A broken mechanism was just a puzzle, and puzzles could be solved, but Wexler soon learned, this was no ordinary machine. Voiceover, atmospheric, detailed pacing. The gears inside the watch were fused in impossible configurations, brass teeth interlocked backward like something meant to unmake movement instead of sustain it. Each attempt to reset the spring met resistance, as if an invisible hand pushed against him. He described the sound it made in his journal: not ticking, breathing. A soft inhale, then pause. Then exhale. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but the sound followed him home. He'd wake at night to find the pocket watch glowing faintly on his workbench, its hands twitching counterclockwise in tiny, erratic bursts. Analytical narration, cool and investigative tone. On February 2, 1913, Wexler invited his apprentice, 19-year-old named Henry Dobbins, to assist in a full dismantling of the device. According to Dobbins's later testimony, the air grew colder as they worked, every candle in the workshop dimmed, and when Wexler lifted the final gear from the housing, the ticking stopped, completely. For several seconds, the two men said they heard nothing at all, not wind, not street noise, not even their own heartbeats. Then, all at once, every clock in the shop began to ring, simultaneously. Voiceover, eerie, cinematic tone. Dobbins fled into the street, where he claimed to see shadows moving against the gaslights, longer than any living thing could cast. When he returned minutes later with help, Wexler was gone. The workshop door was locked from the inside, tools scattered, and on the workbench the pocket watch sat open, its gears slowly turning backward again, as if something had fixed itself. The only sign of Elias Wexler was his reflection in the shop's front window, a faint, ghostly outline that vanished when the glass was touched. Documentary narration, investigative historical tone. Local police dismissed Dobbins's account, recording Wexler's disappearance as a voluntary absence. The shop was sold, its contents auctioned to pay debts. The watch was purchased by a collector of curiosities named Dr. Isaac Thorne, a physician known for his interest in hypnotism and temporal illusions. Thorne kept the watch in a glass case in his study, occasionally showing it to guests that he claimed the device could bend perception, that by staring into it long enough, one could watch time fold backward like water in a tide pool. Voiceover, ominous calm. In April of 1914, Thorne invited 3 friends to witness an experiment that he placed the watch under a magnifying lens and wound at once. Only once. Witnesses described the air vibrating, books falling from shelves and the faint scent of ozone and lilac. Thorne began to laugh, saying he could see himself as a boy, then as a young man, then as nothing but dust. The laughter stopped suddenly. When the others reached him, Thorne was slumped over the desk, his eyes open, his hair turned white. The watch's hands rested at 6 to 12, analytical narration. Myth to history bridge tone. After Thorne's death, the object vanished again. Records of it appear sporadically through the 1920s and 1930s. A pawn ticket here, museum inventory there. Each time, the notes describe the same phenomenon: time loss, auditory distortion, backward motion. One curator wrote in 1937, "I placed the watch beside my desk clock for observation. By morning, both kept perfect synchronization, but neither displayed the correct time." Voiceover, poetic, closing tone. By the 1950s, the watch resurfaced one final time, donated anonymously to the Augusta Historical Society, the same city where Eleanor Marin once disappeared. The curator who logged it made one last notation before sealing it behind glass. The object hums faintly, as if remembering. Narration, cinematic build-up for next part, but the story didn't end there, because 50 years later, in 1963, a series of electrical blackouts struck downtown Augusta, each one lasting exactly 6 minutes and 12 seconds, and when the lights returned, security footage from the museum showed something impossible: the glass case empty, the watch, gone again. Voiceover, soft fade-out tone. To this day, no one knows who, or what, took it, but one fact remains constant through every account, every witness, every century: when the hands reach 6:12, time stops being something you measure. It becomes something that measures you. August 12, 1963. That a Monday night like any other in downtown Augusta, Georgia, storefronts closing, radios humming, streetlights flickering under the thick summer air, and then, without warning, the entire power grid collapses. Every bulb, every neon sign, every home from the riverfront to Walton Way plunged into total blackness. The blackout lasted exactly 6 minutes and 12 seconds. Documentary narration, calm, historical tone. At first, authorities assumed it was a transformer failure, but when engineers inspected the substations, they found something they couldn't explain. All the dials, meters, and analog clocks had wound themselves backward, precisely 6 minutes. When the power returned, emergency switchboards flooded with calls. Some were about outages, others about sightings. Voiceover, rising tension. Witnesses along the river claimed they heard a long, low whistle, metal shrieking like something ancient forcing its way through fog. One man, a night watchman named Calvin Red, reported seeing a full passenger train rolling silently down the abandoned line by 6th Street, the same route that had been torn up 30 years earlier. Red swore the engine bore markings no longer in use. Augusta and Charleston Rail Company, a company defunct since 1904. Analytical narration, investigative tone. The police dismissed it as hysteria, but then the photos surfaced that a hobby photographer, Margaret Ellison, was testing long-exposure film during the blackout. When her negatives were developed, one frame showed the bridge crossing the Savannah River, and a faint, spectral outline of a locomotive. The lights on its passenger cars glowed faintly blue, and through the blur of motion a figure could be seen in the engineer's cabin, motionless, staring forward. On the carriage behind him, etched faintly into the metal, 6:12. Voiceover, cinematic tone. Margaret brought the photos to the Augusta Historical Society, where the curator recognized something instantly: the faint reflection in the glass case beside her wasn't her own. It was the outline of a pocket watch, the same artifact that vanished from the museum that very night. Narration, calm, descriptive pacing. By morning, local newspapers carried fragments of the event, each one more sensational than the last. Ghost train sighted over river. Augusta plunged into timeless night. Officials tried to trace the cause of the outage, but every line of inquiry circled back to one impossible fact: no equipment was damaged, no generators overloaded. It was as if power had simply ceased to exist, and yet, dozens of witnesses reported watches freezing, radios crackling with old broadcasts, and clocks resetting to 6:12. Voiceover, eerie slow burn. One man's testimony, recorded by local AM station WGAU the following morning, stood out among the rest. "I was crossing Broad Street when everything went dark," said the man, his voice trembling. "Then I heard a train horn, faint, like underwater. I turned, and I swear, I saw faces in the windows. They weren't screaming, they were waiting." When asked to describe them, he hesitated before saying, "Like people who had been gone too long." Documentary narration, measured pacing. Within days, strange patterns emerged. Time cards at textile mills recorded employees clocking out before they had even clocked in. A student's wristwatch ran backward during class, but when checked again, the ink on his notebook had reversed itself, too, as if the words were unwritten. Voiceover, connecting past and present. Investigators combed through old records, searching for any connection between the blackout and the long-defunct Augusta and Charleston line. They found one: the final train on that route had vanished in 1904, its last recorded stop, the Marin Plantation, among its cargo manifest, farm tools, livestock feed, and one personal item listed but never recovered: golden pocket watch, initials EM. Eleanor Marin. Narration, chilling realization tone. It took nearly 60 years, but the pieces finally aligned: the fire, the curse, the watch, and now, the train that refused to stay buried in time. When local historians overlaid the blackout map with the original 1904 railway chart, they discovered the pattern of the outage formed a perfect outline of the old route, every flicker of darkness matching where the rails once lay. Voiceover, slow, haunting tone. One final report came from a fisherman on the South Carolina side of the river. He claimed to have found metal debris in the water's edge the next morning, burnt, rusted, and engraved faintly with the words, "Augusta and Charleston No. 9, the lost train." And nearby, caught in the mud like a relic unburied by time, was something smaller, a brass chain, still warm to the touch, and at its end, the pocket watch, its glass cracked, its hands frozen forever at 6:12. Closing. Voiceover, poetic and foreboding. The artifact was taken back to the museum, sealed behind glass again, and labeled simply "recovered from Savannah River, provenance unknown." But every few years, when the humidity rises and the lights flicker along Broad Street, someone swears they hear it: a whistle in the dark, a heartbeat between seconds, and that same impossible ticking, backward. By the spring of 1964, Augusta had returned to normal, at least, that's what the newspapers said. The lights stayed on, the trains didn't scream through the river fog anymore, and the pocket watch, once again behind its museum glass, had gone still. But silence isn't peace. In stories like these, silence is the space where time goes to hide. Documentary narration, factual, calm tone. On March 18, 1964, a group of surveyors working near Candler's Bluff reported an odd magnetic reading. Their compasses rotated endlessly, and the air around them shimmered, a faint distortion, like heat rising off asphalt. When they checked their wristwatches, each one read a different hour. Each one, however, stopped at 6:12. They took photographs, but every frame developed blank, as if the emulsion itself had been burned away by time. Voiceover, dark tension building. The next week, strange things began happening across the county. Church bells rang at impossible hours, milk curdled minutes after being poured, and every morning, the same thick, gray fog rolled in from the river, not at dawn, but precisely 6:12 a.m. Locals started calling it the dead minute. A moment each day when clocks hesitated between 1 second and the next, as though deciding whether to move forward or stop forever. Narration, investigative tone. Meteorologists blamed temperature inversions, physicists suggested magnetic interference, but in the archives of the Augusta Historical Society, something older began to reappear. Pages that shouldn't have existed, letters written by Eleanor Marin, dated 1853, appeared inside storage boxes catalogued in 1920. Ink still fresh, paper uniget. Each page contained the same closing line: "He's still waiting for the train." Voiceover, cinematic pacing. In April, the curator, a man named George Calloway, reported a humming noise from the exhibit hall. At first, he assumed it was a faulty light ballast, then he realized the sound wasn't electrical. It was mechanical, rhythmic. A steady tick, 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 coming from inside the sealed glass case. The watch was moving again. Analytical narration, measured tone. Security footage from that night, the final recording ever taken in the building, shows the main hall empty. Then, at 6:12 exactly, the cameras distort, every frame stretches and folds like film melting under heat. And the static, for just a second, a figure appears behind the glass, a pale man, featureless, his eyes reflecting light but no expression. When the image clears, the watch is gone. Voiceover, rising dread. By dawn, every clock in Augusta had stopped, not broken, not winded down, simply ceased. Traffic lights froze mid-cycle, school bells rang without sound, photographs taken that morning show streets full of people standing still, as though the moment itself refused to let go of them. The blackout from the year before had lasted 6 minutes and 12 seconds, this time the silence lasted 6 hours. Narration, slow, poetic tone. When the world restarted, something was missing. Every mechanical device within the city's old district was found rusted and aged as if decades had passed overnight, but living things, people, trees, birds, were untouched, except for one thing, their memories, entire blocks of conversation. Whole days, erased, all replaced by a single lingering sound in the back of their minds, a train horn fading into water. Voiceover, connecting myth to consequence. No one ever found the watch again, but in the years that followed, strange reports emerged all across the South. A conductorless freight train sighted in Alabama. A plantation ruin in Louisiana where time ran backward for an hour. A mirror in Charleston that reflected sunrise hours before it arrived. Each location shared one detail, a timestamp scrawled somewhere nearby. 6 to 12, documentary narration, calm, final tone. In 1985, a professor from Emory University, Dr. Warren Miles, compiled every known event into a single theory. He proposed that the Marin Fire of 1853 wasn't the beginning of a curse, but a fracture that wound in time itself, centered around grief, blood, and obsession. The pocket watch, forged from the same brass that once held human shackles, became its vessel. Every time someone tried to fix it, they didn't restore time, they reopened the wound. Voiceover, slow fade to resolution. Today, Candler's Bluff is nothing more than a clearing by the river. The rails are long gone, the soil reclaimed by moss and rain, but if you stand there in early morning fog, locals say the air still hums softly, a whisper just beneath hearing. Some say it's the wind through the reeds, others claim it's the echo of a train that never stopped, but a few swear it's a heartbeat, mechanical, relentless, ticking just under the surface of the earth, waiting. Closing narration, final reflection tone. They say time heals all wounds, but in Georgia, time isn't a healer. It's the scar, and somewhere, buried beneath the roots of Candler's Bluff, a pocket watch keeps breathing, its hands forever caught between past and present, forever whispering one impossible promise: it will be 6:12 again.